We'll continue our study of the plant kingdom by talking about life cycles and tropisms and hormones. So life cycles of plants are similar to what we talked about with the fungi and protista in that they undergo an alternation of generations between a sporophyte and a gametophyte. Remember that the sporophyte is the spore plant, and the gametophyte is the gamete plant. The sporophyte is diploid and produces haploid spores by means of meiosis, and the gametophyte is a haploid plant that produces gametes by mitosis, and when the gametes fuse together, that produces a diploid zygote which will grow into a new sporophyte, and this is called alternation of generations. In the non-vascular plants, the gametophyte is the dominant phase of the life cycle, but in vascular plants, the sporophyte dominates, and we'll look at what that means. So when we look at a generalized life cycle of a plant, okay, notice that we have the sporophyte plant, which is diploid, okay. It'll undergo meiosis to produce the spores, which are haploid. They will then grow by mitosis into the gametophyte plant, which will produce, and there might be two forms of gametophyte, a male and a female. They'll produce the gametes, the sperm and egg cells, by mitosis, because the gametes are also haploid. When the sperm and egg fuse together to make the diploid zygote, the zygote will then grow into a new sporophyte plant. So we're alternating between the diploid phase and the haploid phase of the life cycle. It looks a little different in the different groups of plants, so let's look briefly at the different groups of plants and how the life cycle works in those. In the bryophytes, which are non-vascular plants, these are very, very small plants. They're about a quarter to a half an inch tall. They do not have any vascular tissue. They depend on diffusion to move water and minerals from one cell to the next, and to move the sugars from one cell to the next also. So in these, the gametophyte stage is the main part of the life cycle, even though it's haploid. There's a male and a female gametophyte, which look very similar to the naked eye, but when you look at them microscopically, you can see the antheridia and archegonia of the male and female. The sperm cells are produced in the antheridium, and they have to travel by means of standing water to the egg cell in the archegonium of the female gametophyte. When the egg is fertilized there in the archegonium, the zygote then will start growing out of the archegonium into the sporophyte part of the life cycle. The sporophyte here is entirely dependent, it grows out of the top of the gametophyte and is entirely dependent on the gametophyte for its food and nourishment. The stalk grows a sporangium up here on a cap, and inside here is where meiosis occurs to produce the haploid spores, which can then be released from the spore cap, and they can grow into new gametophyte generations. In the seedless vascular plants, which includes the ferns, these also produce spores, but this time the sporophyte is the dominant part of the life cycle. So the mature sporophyte here has clusters of sporangia on the backs of the fronds. Those clusters are called sori, and each sorus contains a number of sporangia, which produce many tiny little spores by meiosis. The spores can then grow into new gametophyte stages. The gametophyte is a very small leaf-like structure that's about maybe a quarter to a half an inch in diameter, very small. And on the gametophyte, you have both the male gametophyte, antheridium, and the female gametophyte, the archegonium, present on the same plant. They also require water for the sperm cells to travel to the egg cells in the archegonium. When the egg cell is fertilized, the zygote, the diploid zygote, now grows out of there into the new sporophyte. The gametophyte, they do grow out of the top of the gametophyte, but the gametophyte is definitely not dominant. It's very, very tiny, and you only see it at this stage here. Once the new sporophyte grows up, then you have the dominant sporophyte, which you're familiar seeing when you look at a fern. Now in the seed plants, the gymnosperms and angiosperms, they don't actually produce spores. We do still call the stages the sporophyte and the gametophyte, but what we see is that in the seed plants, the sporophyte is much more dominant and the gametophyte is much, much reduced in size, very, very tiny. Gymnosperms, the term gymnosperm means naked seed. These seeds are produced on the scales of cones, like you see here, rather than being protected in the fruit, like the angiosperms are. These are the conifers, like pine trees and fir trees. They have two different kinds of cones. They have a female cone and a male cone. The male cone is a pollen cone, and it produces pollen grains, which travel by means of wind to the seed cone. And when the seeds are the seed cones have ovules on the scales here, which are the female gametophyte, and the pollen grains will be the male gametophyte. When the egg is fertilized by the pollination, that's going to undergo mitosis to produce the zygote, which is going to grow into an embryo, which will be enclosed in a seed with a food supply. And then when the cone is released and the seed is released, it can fly away by means of this little wing here and land on the ground and grow into a new sporophyte. So the tree that you see when you look at a pine tree, that's the mature sporophyte. The gametophyte is only in the ovule and in the pollen grains, very, very tiny, microscopic in size. So you definitely only see the sporophyte part of the life cycle. In the angiosperms, the flowering plants, it's very similar. Okay, the dominant form is going to be the mature plant. That's going to be the sporophyte, and it's going to produce flowers. Okay, the flower is going to be the reproductive organs, and in the flower you've got the male reproductive organs on the anthers, which produce the pollen grains, and the female reproductive organs in the ovary, which produce the ovules, which contain the egg cell. The pollen grains are the male gametophytes, and they're going to pollinate or fertilize the ovules inside the ovary, the protected structure inside the flower, and the ovary is going to mature containing the seeds, and that's what a fruit is. A fruit is the mature ovary containing the seeds. The ovary is a more protective structure than just the seed coat that you find on the scale cones. Now, plants do respond to stimuli of various kinds, and the types of responses that plants have, we call them tropisms. These are growth responses where the plant growth curves toward or away from whatever the stimulus happens to be. There are three main kinds of tropisms. There's phototropism, which is response to light, thigmotropism, response to touch, and gravitropism, which is response to gravity. These all occur in response to hormonal signals, and so we'll look at the various kinds of hormones and what kind of signals they cause and how plants respond that way. There are other responses of plants that are faster responses, like rapid responses, and photoperiodism, that is their response to the changing length of day and night. But these are not growth responses, these are different kinds of responses. Tropisms occur again because of growth. So here we show phototropism. When the sunlight is on one side of the plant, the cells on the shady side will grow longer, and the ones on the sunny side will stay the same size, and that's going to cause the plant, since these cells get longer, that's going to cause the plant to bend toward the light. And so here you see a plant that has been left in the same position and bending toward the light in phototropism. Thigmotropism is involved in several different ways. One way is by response, like in the Venus flytrap, when the insect touches the trigger hairs and causes it to close quickly. But then we also have thigmotropism in terms of tendrils of an ivy here you see catching onto a fence as it grows up the fence. This is a response to touch. They are looking for something to hang on to. And then gravitropism is response to gravity. Stems have a negative response to gravity. They have a tendency to grow away from gravity, and roots have a positive response to gravity, and they'll grow toward gravity. So when you have the plant that's growing normally and you turn it on its side, you'll see the stems start to bend up and the roots start to bend down. Both of these kinds of tropisms, or most of these tropisms, are caused by response to various kinds of hormones. A hormone is a chemical messenger that is produced in one place and has an effect in another place. And there are three main kinds of hormones, well, really four kinds of hormones in plants. The auxins, which are involved in stem elongation, and that, since they're in stem elongation, that has to do with phototropism and gravitropism, because both of those have to do with elongation of the cells. We have cytokinins, which are root growth and germination hormones. And then we have gibberellins, which are involved in germination and bud development. These are the hormones that make the plants grow bigger and make the flowers bigger, the things that you would find in something like Miracle-Gro. And then ethylene, which is not really a hormone, is a gas produced by fruits, which helps enhance and speed up fruit ripening. And this concludes the notes on tropisms, hormones, and life cycles.